Good morning. Welcome to everyone. It is May 18th, and we are here with Joint Legislative Management Committee. For members of the committee, if you recall, last time our executive session went a little bit longer than we anticipated, and we were not able to hear from Commissioner Fitch from BGS. She is here this morning to talk to us about the airflow study that was done of the Capitol building. So without any further delay, Commissioner Fitch, please walk us through what we need to know. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Jennifer Fitch, and I'm the BGS Commissioner. And today I have with me Joe Asia, who is the Design and Construction Division Director, and Tay Southworth, who will likely be the star of the show this morning. He is our mechanical engineer and the expert that we have with us this morning. So in short, we were asked by the chairs of the House and Institutions Committees to conduct an airflow analysis in the State House. It's important for folks to know that right now there are no standards in the state of Vermont that relate to airflow and capacity, meaning how many people you can have in a room based on the amount of fresh air. However, we applied an ASHRAE standard, and Tay can speak more about that. But basically, ASHRAE is what mechanical engineers typically use as a standard in the United States. And he can speak more about that. So what we did was we applied that standard to several rooms throughout the State House, including all of the committee rooms, plus additional rooms that were asked for by the Sergeant at Arms. I believe there's still a couple more rooms we need to provide. But essentially what we found was there are rooms within the State House that have ample air, fresh air supply in those rooms and can accommodate a large number of people. There are also committee rooms within the State House that do not believe in applying the standard that you have enough fresh air to accommodate the number of committee members that are assigned to certain committee rooms. It does appear that there are, based on the analysis, other rooms within the State House that could accommodate those committees if you so choose to do that. We also do have 7 temporary committee rooms that were set up in the basement of 133 and the connector of 109 and 111. We have up to 7 of those that were set up last fall, and those were both for physically distancing and for airflows as well. So airflow analysis was taken into consideration at the time those rooms were fit up, and we have those numbers, and I believe we've provided them a second time to the Sergeant at Arms, but happy to provide it to this group as well. So that's sort of the high level summary of what we did and what we've provided. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions, I'm guessing anyway.
Yes. So I wonder, Commissioner Fitch, if you might let us know from your perspective or from your teams, what do you think are the most salient, most important parts of the report that we should be focused on? I think at this time of year, I know that I'm sitting here thinking about all the different conference committees and all the different bills that are in play, and I'm just trying to bring myself fully present in this meeting. So what really should we be focused on as we understand this?
So I think what's important for this committee to consider is a couple of facets. So these systems have been in place since the 1970s and 1980s. And again, building code over time, right, continues to get generated, and there's more and more code essentially. So the code didn't exist at the time that these mechanical systems, right, were designed and installed. We do, and that is to say, we've had folks in these committees all along, right, since the 1970s and 1980s that have been working inside these committees. Tay can speak more to what happens when you have less fresh air in a room, right, and you have too many people. But essentially, right, there's more carbon dioxide in the air, and that's why you might feel a little sleepy. And there could be a couple of other side effects as well that Tay can speak to. But folks have certainly been in these committee rooms all along. And so that's something for you all to decide in terms of, how you want to bring people back in person. The other important point to make as well. So we provided you a table that laid out all the different rooms and it laid out sort of the minimum airflow, if you will. And when I say minimum, it's really maximum. It's the maximum airflow you can get when the system is operating independently as it's been programmed. That's one of the columns. You'll notice there's a second column on that spreadsheet that increases the number of people. And that's because we have something called variable air volume HVAC components. And what that allows us to do in those particular rooms is we can do a manual override. It would require us at BGS to have a dedicated staff member to you throughout the day. And basically what they do is they override the system to bring in more air than how it's been programmed. You'll see that that's true for the Senate committee rooms and several other committee rooms in the State House as well. Tay has already started to have those conversations with our operations and maintenance folks to talk about logistics in terms of what that looks like and how we would do it. But that's one more opportunity as well. If you would like to increase over that, in those cases, if you would like to increase beyond sort of what it's programmed to do, we could have someone dedicated to manually overriding and increasing that number. But with that, if it's okay, Madam Chair, I'd like to yield to Tay because he's really our expert and he's really the person to answer all the questions.
That sounds great. Thank you, Commissioner. Much appreciated. And Tay, I did see you and then you disappear. There you are. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. So Tay, what do we need to know?
I think the commissioner wrapped it up really quite concisely. The state of Vermont does not have a ventilation code, so us poor engineers have to rely on best engineering practice. Because of the current pandemic, I looked at what the recommendations are. The WHO and CDC refer back to ASHRAE, and ASHRAE says provide as much air as you can and still maintain temperature and humidity control, but no less than ASHRAE 62.1. So I use ASHRAE 62.1 as the basis. And there are a whole table of different kinds of occupancies that have different amounts of air for people and space. There is a specific category called legislative chambers, and then pretty much the rest of the space is very similar to either a conference room or an office. In all of those spaces is 5 CFM per person and 0.06 CFM per square foot. So I went through all the rooms in the State House based on a winter design day when the airflow is bringing in as much air as it can without freezing the cooling coil. And with the VAVs at minimum position, which is the position they would be in first thing in the morning when it's cold and there's not a lot of internal gains in the room, and said, okay, this is the maximum number of people I feel confident recommending be in the room. Now understand that any day that it's warmer than that outside, we can bring in more outside air, but it's a dynamic situation that would have to be literally calculated on the fly. So these are all worst case numbers.
I see Representative Ansel.
I'm willing to jump in and show how little I know about airflow and engineering and everything else. So looking at the chart, the Ways and Means Committee, which is the room I'm most familiar with, has a pretty high capacity relative to the other House rooms. But I'm curious whether you take into account the fact that we keep our doors closed. We sort of have to run the committee, and that there's a lot of furniture in the rooms. So we're actually quite close to one another, even if there's only the 11 of us on the committee in the room. And I think I heard your last comment sort of taking into account the temperature in the room. My experience is that if the system is fully operational, it's really, really cold. Is that where we are if we're at that baseline?
Is Ways and Means, is that a House committee or Senate committee?
It's House.
Okay, the House has a fixed volume of variable temperature air, not a variable volume of fixed temperature air. And all of the calculations are based on the doors being closed, as if they were fixed volumes.
Yeah.
What you're feeling is as the temperature goes up, those units are providing colder and colder air to try to keep the room cold. Unfortunately, we've been putting more people in those rooms, and those particular rooms were designed for back in 1970 when that system was installed. So So the system gets up to its full capacity, and many times, particularly in the spring, it cannot maintain temperature.
Follow-up question, Representative Ansel?
Well, I was curious about the furniture, the fact that we're elbow to elbow in those rooms, and when you're looking at the not just airflow, but at the possibility of transmission and all of that, whether that's an issue that people who are no more than me take into account.
So there's two things when you're looking at, and this is during COVID times. So during COVID times, when we have physical distancing requirements like 6 feet, or, schools recently went to 3 feet,
Mhm.
right? When you do this analysis, what we did downstairs in the basement of 103 or 133 and the connector between 109 and 111, we looked at both factors. We looked at airflow, we looked at physical distancing, and it was whichever one gave you the least, whatever was the lower number, that's your capacity. So they're two separate factors that you need to consider. This analysis was just airflow. We did not do the physical distancing analysis, but you would do both, right, during COVID times to determine what that what that maximum capacity is based on which factor is lower. And the other point that I didn't make that I think is really important for this committee, and I know my chairs know it well, we do have an HVAC project for the State House. And we're actually executing the contract with the AE firm right now. And I'm expediting that contract as quickly as I can through the process. And so that is all to say that you do have an older HVAC system, right? I said the 70s and the 80s, and then it's time for those to be replaced. And when those are replaced, right, we will make sure that we bring the airflows that we need up to capacity in those rooms for the number of people you would like to accommodate as well. So I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that we also have an HVAC project that's about to get kicked off and designed.
Thank you.
I believe Senator Benning was next, and then the speaker.
Actually, I believe the speaker was next, Madam Pro Tem.
All right, Madam Speaker.
Thanks, Senator. So I'm just have some questions around the override function. Have you used the override function in the past?
That is a Tay Southworth question.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to turn my video off. Apparently, I don't have the bandwidth to support the ability to talk and see me at the same time. So you'll have to suffer with a picture from me of early ski season. What the VAV system does is it's designed to control the temperature in the space as an air conditioning system. So the air conditioning system produces cold air. The VAV system then brings that cold air into the space, and if there's very little load in the room, the VAV box is bringing in its minimum amount of CFM, and as the load in the room increases and the temperature tries to rise, the VAV box opens and brings in more cold air. So what will happen, say you have a room that's designed for 6 people and you want to put 8 people in there. When you are ready to move in, we can bump that up to the minimum CFM needed to support 8 people. And because you're actually going to have the lights on and you're going to have some people in there, the temperature should still hold fairly close. It may drop a degree or 2. If it starts to rise, then the VAV box controls will still allow it to go farther open. So you won't know when you're getting more air, but you'll know that it's not going to be any less air. But I can't turn the box on, say at 7 o'clock in the morning, and have you come in at 10 and expect the room to be warm and comfortable.
So the override function, is that something that's done manually, or is that done automatically? Does the system adjust itself based on the numbers and data that it's receiving?
So what we would be doing is manually inputting the CFM for the VAV box. The system itself is going to control based on temperature, and it also is looking at CO2. And if the CO2 levels start to rise, it will try to bring in more outside air, but it is limited by the capacity of the heating coil at the air handler.
So have you or someone done the override in the State House previously? Is that something that's been done?
Not in the State House, but we did successfully do it down at the Wyndham Superior Court when we did a mock trial in preparation for the jury trial reopening.
Okay, so are there plans to test out the override system to ensure that it works for when we come back?
We can, but
Yes.
it's all, digital controls. I can see it on my screen. So I tell it to increase its CFM, and it actually tells me, yes, this is the CFM I'm producing.
I do think it would be really important to do a trial run on the override system.
Yes, we're happy to do a trial on the override system and just to hopefully bring a little comfort for folks. We work with Janet Miller, the Sergeant at Arms, all the time because, as you know, right, we have an older system. Multiple rooms are on zones. And so what will happen is one room will feel warm, the next room on the same zone will feel cold. And so Janet Miller and BGS play this game all the time of basically going into the system and making modifications. So we try to make everybody feel as comfortable as we can. And we do that all winter long. So happy to do a test. I agree with you that we should and we will. But I also want to bring comfort to folks just so you know we're constantly in there playing with the controls in the system all the time.
And I just have one more follow-up. Do you know, based on your test at the courthouse, what are the sound impacts? Would we know a difference if you turned on the override? Would it be the same amount of noise, or just any impacts from when the override happens?
It would be no different than when you're actually in the committee room itself and the temperature starts to rise and the box opens up to maintain temperature. Remember, we're talking about the front of the State House, the 1858 portion. That's where the VAV boxes are. Basically, the Cedar Creek room through the Senate committee rooms.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Senator Benny.
So a couple of things. First off, for Jane and Janet's purposes, there is already at BGS dedicated personnel for the override monitoring. They're not looking for an additional person on the payroll. The other thing is, for the speaker, the House committee rooms do not have an override system available. The Senate rooms, the Senate committee rooms, with the exception of Bobby Starr's room, are all capable of holding I'll call a normal committee conversation with the override system available. And the way that I understand it, as the commissioner explained it a moment ago, literally, if it gets uncomfortable in the room, a chair would call Janet Miller. Janet Miller would call BGS, and they would override the system to enable us to change the air in the room. We really have to get away from the narrative of COVID being in existence. If COVID is still a problem, Zoom is still available. We have to start focusing on creature comfort as the narrative moving forward. Otherwise, we're going to get lost in trying to figure out how to translate everything you're hearing now. The HVAC system having to be repaired, Commissioner Fitch, correct me if I'm wrong. The boiler system is also going to be replaced, and it has to be done as soon as possible. My understanding would be that all of where Mike Ferrant is down through Nadine Martin's area would have to be vacated in order to accommodate those changes. Am I correct?
So I believe, and I will segue to Tay, originally, so what happened, so now we're talking about summertime, and the problem with summertime is that I like to use the word humidity. That's not the right word, but most people know what that means. Basically, it just means moist air. We got lots of moist air in the summertime, right? And so what happens is that as that moist air comes into the State House, we have no way of driving that moisture out, right? So we need to bring a summertime boiler or some way of heating the air. So it's kind of crazy, right? We're going to heat the air in the summertime to condition it. It's exactly what happens. So we heat the air, we pull the moisture out, and then we cool it back down. And that's your dry, for lack of a better term, cooled air. And that's what draws that moisture out, so we don't have the mold issues that we've had in the last several
I
years.
just want to make sure that this committee is able to make decisions on
Yeah.
a timeline that enables us to get back in January.
Yes,
There's construction that has to go on to accommodate those things. It is my understanding at the moment that everything from where Mike Ferrant is down through where Nadine Martin is, that entire area should be vacated. Is that correct?
so so that you are correct, Senator Benning, in that our original plan was to put a summertime boiler where Ledge Council is. That is correct. My understanding is Tay now is looking at two different options. One could be either in the State House or potentially in 6 Baldwin. So I want to give him a chance to chime in here. I didn't realize there were two options, but I think this year or this spring, we've been looking at that. And I believe we're going to bring both options back to the two committees, your committee and Alice Emmons' committee as well. And so, so we have some choices to make, but yes, we're going to have to find a way to accommodate something in some place. The other thing I want folks to know is that we're just starting design for HVAC, and it's going to take us a while to go through that design process. And so our goal right now, but we're going to have to work pretty quickly to get it done, but we want to expedite as quickly as we can, is we'd like to get construction going the following after your next session. So after the 22 session, that's when we would hopefully start construction, because we want to minimize disruption to you folks in being able to come back to the State House and do your good work. But let me make sure that I was correct in what I just said, because I don't know exactly where we are on the summertime boiler. So Tay, is that true? You're looking at two options?
Actually, we're looking at more than that.
Oh, okay.
So right now, the central heat plan is available to us from the 1st of October till the 1st of May. It may dribble past the 1st of May if we have a particularly cold spring like we did this year and we kept it on for another couple of weeks. Once that goes down, there is no heat source available. Traditionally, the way to bring the humidity level of the outside air down to a reasonable level in the building is you cool the air, which causes the moisture to condense on the cooling coil. And then you bring it back up to maintain a comfortable space temperature. You know, when you set a cold glass of water on the table in the summertime, how it sweats on the outside? Well, that's pretty much what the cooling coil does. So I would need a source of heat in the summertime to be able to do that. But
So,
there are some
Tay-
other technologies of runaround refrigeration where like a dehumidifier in your home, there's actually two coils. There's the cooling coil at the front of the unit, which cools and wrings the water out. Then the airflow passes across the heat rejection coil, and you actually warm the air back up there. So there may be a possibility of being able to do something like that on a commercial scale. I'm waiting to find out from my engineers, once I get a contract in place, just how we're going to accomplish correcting the problems. I haven't given them the solution.
Hey, let me interrupt you. This is very educational from an engineering standpoint, but this committee is going to have to start making decisions really quick about who's going where before we get back in January. My concern is that we have limited available space, and by limited I mean on a time frame at 133 State Street for committee rooms to be operating in. I'm not sure as I'm sitting here whether that extends into 2023. My thought here is that Bobby Starr has to move out of where he is to make things start happening. The Capitol Police are probably going to have to move into that space where Bobby was. We are in the process of talking about moving the copy room and creating a coat room in the area of where that copy room is. The people who are in the mezzanine and are located in the ground floor of that space will have to be evacuated during that process and move somewhere else. There is conversation going on right now with Jen Carby and Mike O'Grady. I'm meeting with them this afternoon, but these pieces all have to dovetail with each other to accommodate your construction schedule. So getting answers to the construction schedule is really important in a really quick time frame, because otherwise we are all still hanging in the air waiting to make decisions, and we just can't afford to be doing that anymore. I'm going to add one other thing. One of the other possibilities here to improve creature comfort is for the Rules Committee to direct the chairs to take more frequent breaks and just evacuate the room in order to make people creature comfortable, if you will. But these decisions all really have to start moving somehow. And Madam Pro
Understood,
Tem,
Senator Benning, understood.
I was
We
hoping
know
to make a
we're-
motion at some point this morning to let Bobby Starr take over room 9 so we can at least get the next step moving.
Okay, I will park that just for a moment, Senator. I want to go back to Commissioner Fitch and give her an opportunity to sort of give us the framing for the construction schedule. What are the decision points that you're wrestling with right now so that we can understand the position that you are in?
So one of the things that's going to unfortunately complicate all of this is if you do want to make alterations to the State House. And so if we're going to make alterations to the State House, that really should be tied to the HVAC project, right? If I take down a wall, for example, it's going to change my supply and my return and how much air I need to be pumping and where my vents are located. It's actually really complicated. And so that is one thing that I don't know what the plan is for the State House. And if you are actually considering making alterations and taking down walls or adding walls, I don't know if that's the case or not. If it was the case, those are things that we would want to know as quickly as possible so that in the design of the HVAC system, we're taking that into account. If you're not ready to make those decisions yet, but you think it might be probable, then we would still want to know that during the design process to make sure that as we design the system, right, and we make alterations in the future, it's easier for us to do that in the future. The thing that's really important for folks to know is it's gonna be pretty invasive. We're gonna have to take down ceilings. We're gonna have to do a whole bunch of stuff because we're gonna be changing all the vents, right, throughout the State House. So it is pretty intrusive, which is why I'm recommending we do it once versus doing it twice, if that's possible. So that's a really big decision point that we need to make pretty quickly. In terms of the construction schedule, what I can tell you is we're going to do everything we can do to expedite it. I've been having these conversations with the team already, and we have some ideas to do that, but we really need the AE firm under contract. Like I said, we're expediting it. It is with the vendor for signature right now. As soon as it comes back, we will expedite it and we will have that meeting as quickly as possible. But having a point person that we can go to at BGS that represents the legislature, right, that we can start to have these kickoff meetings with, and we can start to have these discussions with, and being able to have those discussions as we need to have them will help us expedite. If we have to wait, and this is, I'm just being honest, if we have to wait for decision points, it's going to slow down the design process, which will then impact how quickly we can start construction. But the goal is to start construction as quickly as possible. I just can't make a firm commitment until we have the AE firm on board.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Representative Leclerc.
Thank you, Madam. Senator Benning made a comment. I don't know if I heard it right or not. Did I hear you say that the House committee rooms aren't capable of having a manual override, or they are?
They are not.
That is correct.
Right. So that to me is a bit problematic. So in order to do the House side, you have to do the whole space all
There-
once?
Rob, you have to get this HVAC system redone. And
No, I
that's-
recognize that, but I'm just thinking in the short term here for us to reoccupy that space. What we're faced with, is there any way to address those issues on a temporary but a mechanical way? For instance, I don't know, like a window unit, air conditioner, or fans or something to help, because we're talking about air exchange, correct?
Tay can speak to that. Tay, do you want to speak to
Okay.
that?
If we're not paying any attention to the current pandemic and we assume that that's going to be gone away, then basically the building is the same as it's been for a number of years, and it wouldn't be any different moving back in than it was 3 or 4 years ago. The problem with trying to throw a fan in the window is that air has to come from somewhere. Are we going to put the fan in the window and blow cold outside winter air into the room? Or are we going to put the fan in the window, blowing the air out of the room, which means the air has to come from inside the building somewhere. Most likely it'll be coming up from the corridor. But what's the cleanliness of that air out in the corridor? I don't know. And eventually it's got to come from the outside in. And if it's coming from the outside in and it's not coming in through the air handlers because they're already maxed out, that means you're bringing it in through cracks and crevices and around doors and windows, and it's all unconditioned air. It's not something I would recommend doing.
Very good. It was just a question. Thank you.
And just for clarification, you are correct. We don't have an override in the House committee rooms, but there are some committee rooms on that list, depending on how many folks you want to have in the room, that would accommodate committees. Not all, but there are some.
There are other spaces available right now at 133 State Street, which would provide creature comfort while we're dealing with all the rest to get the house up to speed. That space at 133 State Street, Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, is available this coming year, but not in 2023, if my memory serves.
I see Representative Emmons nodding. Okay,
Correct.
Representative Ansel.
So Senator Benning sort of laying out the questions is really helpful. And just thinking about the next several months between adjournment and next January, it seems to me that standing committee, at least mine, don't need their rooms. I'm not planning on having my standing committee meet. We do, however, have joint committees, and I don't know that are planning to meet, I believe, in person. At least that's my hope. I don't know if somebody has created a list of what those committees are and who it is that we need to find space for, because I don't believe it's the standing committees. I think it's the special or joint or task committees or task force or whatever. And during the construction period, those are the folks that need space. So is that happening somewhere? Yes. No.
I'm laughing because that's us.
So that's why I brought it up. So that's what we need to be doing. Yeah, but I think the focus on the standing committees, it doesn't seem to me to be as critical during that period.
May I point out that there is no construction this summer? This summer, the design team is going to be doing their investigations and coming up with their recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking to see if there are questions. Representative Colston.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. I have a question about the code review. In the Freeman report, they called for the need to have a code review, which determines the occupancy of each room. So how does that connect with the airflow study? Or do they match, or has it happened? Just wondering how that plays into this.
My understanding is that Freeman has been looking at these spaces through the lens of physical distancing. At least I know they did that in the second report. The third report, I think, is a segue into your medium and long-term space goals or needs or opportunities. And so when they say things like code review, they're actually talking about something that's really expansive. So code is like things like energy code, ADA, so folks with disability code, those kinds of codes. It's really expansive. And so that's what they're recommending. I will tell you that the State House is an older building. And as I said before, right, code has changed over time. There's a lot more code today. I don't know if there was any code in the late 1800s. So that is all to say that in general, BGS, when we do a major renovation, and this is in keeping with fire safety, who regulates us for code, they're the folks that come in, right? Make sure that we're code compliant in our buildings. Generally speaking, until we do a major renovation, that's when we then bring everything up to current code. And so that is to say that since the last time a certain space within the State House was renovated, right, we built it to code at the time. And then, you know, when we come and we renovate that space again in the future, we will bring it up to whatever is current code today. So that's what they're talking about with code review. It's very expansive. It goes well beyond airflow. And again, there is no code in Vermont around airflow and capacity. We're really using a best practice here.
Thank you.
I see. I'm going to go with Senator Kitchell and then to Catherine Benham.
Thank you, Senator Ballin. Perhaps I'm the only one struggling. It seems like we're talking about so many different things, and one thing has to be done in order for something else. We talked about having to relocate temporarily, et cetera. And I frankly am having a hard time keeping all the different actions and what who's doing what and what has to be decided by when. Is there some timeline here that lays this out? Obviously, we have different things. If we're talking about COVID versus we're just talking about upgrade in the HVAC and temperature and, you know, comfort of the rooms. But, you know, in other words, Senator Benning had talked about moving into 23, and I'm having a hard time keeping all these discrete decisions and what it will take to do certain things to get us to whatever we agree upon needs to be done. And I know we've thrown in the, you know, let's get ag a committee room. How does that fit in? And is there someone, or is it out there in terms of this has to be decided by when? I think Commissioner Fitch had talked about the sooner certain decisions are made, the better, because that way you can accommodate if a wall needs to be moved or built or whatever. So that's my question. Out of all these discussions, is there so that BGS would know by X date, this is the decision and or recommendation? That's all. I'm just kind of awash at all the different pieces that have been referenced and how to put that into you know, into an overall project.
If I can jump in and answer, Jane, you have to sort of think of it on two tracks. One track is BGS and all of the architectural and design planning that has to come into what their schedule would be. But a great deal of their schedule is dependent on what we decide to do.
Well, that's the heart of my question, Senator Benning, and that is, you know, if we don't act by a certain date, everything else gets backed up. So I think it's clear, and we need to be clear that we have until X to get off the dime so that, you know, BGS can do whatever we expect them to do. That's sort of, and maybe you've got that in your mind. I just wondered, is there actually a time table that lays it out so that we know if it's you and Representative Emmons, when you're going to have that deliverable? And if you're not there, then we will ask you.
At the last meeting, I was directed to put together a Gantt chart.
Right, that's exactly
Mike Ferrant has that information or that spreadsheet designed. The data is going into it literally as we speak. But right now, if I was to urge the next step for this group, it would be to urge the House to decide what they want to do with their committee rooms, because that's the next critical step that I see.
Okay.
And Bobby Starr is the obvious one from our end, but the House needs to make some firm decisions so that BGS knows they have an open door to take the next steps.
So I'm going to turn to the speaker at this point.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that when we were having this conversation a couple meetings ago, we decided to put into place the State House Advisory Committee to do some work, which I was assuming that the work that Senator Benning and Representative Emmons are doing with this Gantt chart and putting things together would be part of the work that the Advisory Committee is doing to come back to rules on the 15th. of August. So I guess I'm hearing there's a plan in place with the advisory committee, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding if there's a new process being thought out of, or is that what we're going to continue to be on? Because that's my understanding, is that that's how we were moving forward.
Quickly, the committee that we're talking about is contained in the capital bill. It's being changed, its makeup. The capital bill hasn't passed yet. The committee will have to meet after that. I don't think we can wait a great deal of time. The committee is going to make recommendations, but it is this group eventually that has to make the overall choices, as I understand it, unless Rules is taking that on. But I understood that this was the group that was going to make the mechanical decisions. But the bottom line is the House still has to make decisions about where their committee rooms are going to be. And I can't stress that enough. If we're going to make progress, that has to happen much sooner than a advisory committee coming back with recommendations. This is all short term we're talking about. There are long-term implications that this committee is going to be very involved in. But short term, between now and January, if you're going to have a clear understanding of where we're going back to, the next step here is the House, because the Senate, with Bobby Starr being the exception, is literally taken care of for creature comfort purposes. We're not dealing with COVID-19 narrative, creature comfort only.
So if I could, I just want to make a clarification from what I think that we had settled on. In terms of deciding about moving committee rooms or how that will work, you have to sort of see it as the House and the Senate coming together as two countries coming together on a treaty and figuring out who's going to be on what property. I really see that as a joint rules conversation and not a decision being made from this committee. So I understand the pressure that we're all under here. I just need Senator Benning for you to understand another way of looking at this issue that complicates, I think, the question of rooms. Just because the Senate's rooms are quote unquote in a situation of having more creature comforts, that doesn't mean that there isn't some opportunity to share that space with the House if need be. So there is not just one way of looking at this, which is the Senate's taking care of, the House is not, therefore the House needs to figure this out. I see it as these two bodies need to figure out together how we're going to use this space to accommodate all the committees. And so that changes the dynamic a little bit. And so I understand the pressure, and I certainly understand the timeline we're under. And I also think process is very important. So I just want to make sure that you understand that I'm seeing this a little bit differently as to the decision-making points between the House and the Senate on committee rooms.
Becca, I don't think we have a disagreement. When I'm talking about the Senate being okay, it's the Senate committee rooms that have creature comfort, with the exception of Bobby Starr. We've got rooms 9, 10, 11, and the legislative lounge as potential committee rooms, along with several rooms at the bottom of 133 State Street that are all fitted out for creature comfort purposes. And I completely agree that the House and the Senate ought to be in agreement with each other on who's using that space. But I am not in control of that conversation. I'm just trying to urge that it move forward.
Representative Colston, did you have a follow-up?
I just have a comment to make, Madam Pro Tem. I just want to comment on what Senator Kitchell shared. And as I understand what she said, we're really talking about critical path management. So when you have a very detailed timeline, you're identifying all of those critical tasks. And if they're not successful, then they have a cascading impact on other tasks that can't get completed. Therefore, the thing comes off track and behind the time. So that's a known in project management. I don't know how that's employed, but that's exactly what she described. Thank you.
Commissioner Fitch.
And I want to make sure that I'm not confusing the conversation, and I apologize. To Senator Benning's point, there's the short term. In the short term, you have what we've given you for airflows in rooms. That's what you have, and that's what you have to work with for the 22 session, right? Then I'm talking about longer, so that's one conversation. Then there's the longer term conversation about, we have this design project, right? Where we're going to replace the existing HVAC system. That's a longer term conversation. That design is going to start. Hopefully we're going to be under contract with this group really shortly, but construction is not going to happen until at least after the next session. So that is to say, your short-term immediate conversation is, what are you going to do with all the committees in the 22 legislative session? In the interim, we're going to figure out what that schedule is for construction, but it will not start, because we don't have enough time. It won't start before the end of the 22 session. I hope that that helps a little bit in terms of the immediate needs for the ongoing conversations about how you're going to come back in the 22 session.
Representative Ansel?
I think it would be really helpful and probably save us a lot of time at the next meeting if something was written down on a document with the different entities, their jobs, and the time frame. And I know that that's a lot of work to put together, but we will continue to cover the same ground because we're all doing other stuff if we don't get that in front of us.
So Representative Ansel, you are right. And I know the speaker and I have been working on this with both Connor and Carolyn to try to do that exact thing. And you're right, it is complicated, but I absolutely concur that that's what needs to happen next. Senator Benning and Representative Emmons, I'd love to hear from you. Is there something at this juncture, we've got 10 minutes left before I know we all have other meetings we need to get to, that you need before we leave this meeting today? Yes, Representative Emmons.
I don't really think I need anything, but the way I envision this, and maybe I'm wrong, but we've established the advisory committee to come back with recommendations. And I see that sort of as a two-prong approach. One would be sort of recommendations in terms of how to get us all back in the building in January, which would look one way. The overriding issue above that would be, what are the long-term space needs within the building, and make recommendations on that. So that you'd approach it in two prongs. You'd have coming back in January, what that looks like, but also laid on top of that is, how do we do the long-term, which then plays into your HVAC system. You've got to make a decision. What are we doing long-term to help the design of the HVAC system? So that's how I'm seeing the timelines. And I may be off base, but that's my simple mind of approaching it.
Representative Emmons, we are all off base and we are all right all day long. Both things are true. Senator Benning.
Can I just ask Commissioner Fitch, if the entire area where the mezzanine is and the floor below that is vacated during the 2022 session, are you then able to perform construction in there?
Answer that question. So I am going to, if it's okay, I'm going to yield to Joe Asia, who's the design and construction director. Hi, Joe. This is a good question for Joe.
Good morning.
Joe.
For the record, Joe Aja, Director for Design and Construction, BGS. The answer to that question is no, because it's going to take roughly all of this summer and into the fall and partially into March of next year to complete the design for the HVAC system. And part of that is going to be, do you want to expand that to look at potential changes in any committee rooms larger, smaller, or even a future addition. We will need somebody at the table to help us with those decisions, but going forward, next year, there will not be any construction going on. So if you vacated those 2 spaces, it does not benefit us for any additional construction at this time. The following year, yes.
Okay.
Any follow-up, Senator Benning?
No, it just means that whatever's going on at 133 State Street, where we have temporary rooms available, may have to be renegotiated for the 23-24 session.
It's an excellent
Otherwise,
point,
we
Senator.
run out of
Right,
space.
right. At this point, oh, go ahead. Commissioner
Sorry,
Fitch.
there
No,
will be,
go ahead.
there will be options. So once we work with our architect and we have a design and it comes to construction, there will be options, right? So options are construction is continuous, right? Which will then mean we're disrupting some part of the State House while you're all back in committee in 23. Construction could also look like, we start construction and we stop. And then you guys come back for the 23 session, and then we resume construction after you leave. So there's options, right? And there's benefits and disadvantages of the different options. And we would come and we would present those to the legislature, and you would give us direction on which option you want us to take.
Okay.
May I?
So, whose hand is that?
That was Tay.
Oh, Tay, absolutely. No wonder I couldn't see a hand because
That's
you're
all right.
on the ski lift. Go ahead,
There are,
Tay.
you need to understand that there's currently 8 separate air handlers within the State House. So when we talk about phased construction, it may be, that we can replace 1 or 2 during a summer and that not even affect any of the rest of the building that can still stay up and in operation. So it's not an all or nothing kind of thing.
So I hear a couple things. There is a certain amount of concern, worry, and tension that we have to make these decisions quickly. And I know many people on this call right now don't necessarily feel like they have the bandwidth or the space in their brains right now when there's so many other things in play. So I think I just want to acknowledge that. It's not that people don't want to get these decisions made. They want to get them made in a timely manner, and also they don't want to make a mistake. So both those things are true. I'm wondering if, Catherine Benham, are you still on the call? Thank you.
I am.
Catherine, is it possible for you to work with Representative Emmons and Senator Benning and help us come back together with a chart of those decision points that we need to be making in the next few weeks, the next few months? I think that would be really helpful to me and the speaker and to this group. And I also want to acknowledge Senator Benning and Representative Emmons. I know you both have done a lot of thinking about this, and I really appreciate the efforts. And any tension you feel in hear in my voice is just that we're all feeling that last end of session squeeze. And so, but we are grateful to the work that you're doing, because I know the speaker and I are juggling a lot of other things. So thank you, Catherine, for being willing to do that. I see Senator Kitchell's hand.
This is related. I
Yep.
suspect we violate fire codes all the time. When we are doing a budget toward the end, we have standing room only, actually so packed we can't close the door. People are on the windowsills, they're standing behind the committee. I'm just wondering if we should know what is the maximum occupancy, setting aside all the other stuff, whether it's hot or not, the extent to which we need to be sensitive to say, we're creating a hazard here, and we've got to move because we're exceeding the capacity of the room. And I just wondered if the committee rooms had been evaluated relative so that we would know at what point we actually, and sometimes that's happened with room 11 where people are not let in because it's there. So I'm wondering if we have if we have the same information relative to our committee rooms.
Catherine Bennon, is that an answer to Senator Kitchell, or is
Yes,
that, okay,
it is an
great.
answer. And I apologize for my video. I can't, anyway. The connection.
Understood.
The answer is that is one of the questions that Freeman talked about, and the commissioner talked about earlier. And why don't we include that if when we come back to you with a plan, we will include that proposal and you all can choose to do it or not do it. I think it was a code study includes more than just fire. It was electric, plumbing, ADA, elevators, but that is what Freeman recommended, and it's in the back appendix of their report if you want to get more detail from it. But we will, when we come back.
Okay, it's an occupancy limit, really.
Commissioner Fitch.
In terms of, thank you for that question, Senator Kitchell. In terms of fire code, one of the things that Joe and I talked about yesterday is we don't have what we call we don't have the building sprinkled. That's the term we like to use to say, we don't have any heads basically where water comes out if it heats up enough. And so it actually does make a lot of sense in this particular case to do that and HVAC at the same time, because we're going to have to rip down the ceilings. So if we're going to rip down the ceilings, it makes a lot of sense to also do fire suppression at the same time. That wasn't something that we originally accounted for. So that is to say that we would come back and we would ask for additional funding from the Senate and the House institutions committees to add that. But we certainly can look at that. It makes sense to look at it in the design phase. And so then you have the option to decide whether or not you want to do that in construction.
Thank you, Commissioner. I see Chief Romei. Chief, we can't hear you.
I had the other mute button muted. My bad. Matthew Romei, Chief of Police, Capitol Police. We have had the State Fire Marshal's Office in for some evaluative discussions on the committee rooms and the common spaces within the building. Some of the rooms 10 and 11 and the chambers have actually been rated. It is an exceptionally complex process to do that. And we have not had the committee rooms rated because we have been advised through some of the parliamentarians in the past that the State Fire Marshal's Office can't make those obligations to the legislature. We would be happy to invite them in, and we think it is a wonderful best practice to do that, provided the authorization is given to do that.
Oh, well, I'm glad I'm on the first floor.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Chief. So we are at 9 o'clock. I really want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we are going to ask Catherine Benham to work with Representative Emmons and Senator Benning to come back with us with a chart of immediate decision points. And as I said before, we can anticipate that this committee will be meeting after we gavel out. So although we do feel that pressure of the end of session, our work will continue beyond that. At this time, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Madam Speaker. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Have a good day.